Is up. The
What is
question
level of consolidation? Can you be more specific?
This is the health insurance sector is not one that we oversee when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. I don't have the specific data on trends available there, but this is something that I'd be glad to discuss at more length. It's the Department of Justice has been the agency that has looked at healthcare consolidation, but my impression from a distance is that they're using well-accepted standards to examine transactions. But I think a useful focal point for discussion would be to look, and we would be glad to engage in that discussion about specific areas or types of transactions that perhaps ought not have been allowed. Yeah. That's a valid point for consideration.
Last October, the committee held a hearing on how the market power of insurers is harming the ability of physicians to care for patients. As chairman, what are your plans to examine this issue?
We've been having a number of workshops that deal with efforts of individual physicians to provide care. This is an issue that I expect will continue to be a focal point for our own research and for these public deliberations. So I expect that it is an issue that will remain high on our agenda.
And you examine this by conducting workshops?
We conduct workshops, and it's an argument that's often raised in our enforcement efforts with regard to what we believe to be impermissible forms of collaboration among physicians.
So let me ask you, can you explain to us why in the past 7 years have all non-merger enforcement actions involved healthcare providers with virtually no enforcement involving health insurers?
For ourselves, the insurance portfolio itself is one that has been the province of the Department of Justice. That is in the rough distribution of authority that we have over matters.
Isn't it true that the administration has focused more on antitrust enforcement activities on physicians, but not on insurers?
Within our area of authority, our focal points have been physicians and hospitals.
I will come back in the second round.
Yes.
And I will recognize Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. Chairman Kovacic, just a couple questions. Are there procedural changes that you would recommend or that you think we should consider that they be made in the antitrust laws that would increase competition in the marketplace? And if so, what type of things do you think that we should consider?
One thing that I would take a careful look at, Congressman, is the full spectrum of exemptions that now affect commercial activity in our country. I think for myself, and it's a fairly familiar list, I think that one of the suggestions of the AMC report is that be a significant focus of attention. I think that would be useful. I also think it would be very, very helpful for Congress to consider eliminating specific curbs on our authority to act. We've recommended, for example, that the common carrier exemption be reconsidered. There are limitations in our legislation that curb our capacity to do certain types of studies involving insurance, unless we have approval first from the Congress. So I would say two focal points I'd mention. One, exemptions generally, and second, I think specific limitations on our own authority to act.
Okay, thank you. The FTC, as you mentioned, generally doesn't support legislation concerning the granting of exemptions from the antitrust laws. Would you consider such an exemption appropriate in a market in which either the purchaser or the seller already has an exemption from antitrust laws?
Generally speaking, not. We would certainly examine and consider specific arguments as well as the context in which they'd be offered, but we would generally not. And as I suggested before, in the spirit of the AMC report, we'd like to go back to re-examine in many instances the sensibility of the exemptions that already exist.
Okay. Let me ask you about a kind of a specific example here, and you can answer it to the degree that you feel it's appropriate. Is the College Bowl Championship Series in college football, in your opinion, does it constitute a contract or conspiracy to restrain trade, since certain universities have contracts with certain bowl sponsors that excludes other institutions of higher education from participation?
Owing to a very important limit on our jurisdiction, Congressman, that's not one that I've looked at a great deal, but if you were to take away, to a large extent, the not-for-profit exemption that excludes our consideration of these issues, I would love for us to be in the position to know more about this and give you a fuller answer. And to the extent, in my own view, that not-for-profit institutions, which are educational institutions, but they are also large entertainment providers, are they not? The extent to which the not-for-profit exclusion keeps us from looking at that sector of the economy, I think is unwise. That's a carve-out from our jurisdiction that I would applaud Congress reconsidering.
Okay, thank you. And another somewhat specific example is the auto manufacturers and the fact that they don't provide independent auto repair shops with key computer codes and other pertinent repair information. Would that be considered a reasonable restraint of trade, or what? Could you comment on that area?
Yes, Congressman. I think the general trend in doctrine since the early 1990s has been one of giving original equipment manufacturers a greater measure of control over how the distribution of know-how takes place downstream with respect to their own retail outlets, but to independents as well. It seemed in the early 1990s that our Supreme Court was giving a fairly broad charter for competition law to take a look more closely at these arrangements. The lower courts since then have backed off of some of those suggestions. I'd say that it's comparatively difficult to establish under existing doctrine a cause of action for those types of restrictions. But I would say, as my predecessor mentioned, I think 2 years ago in a hearing, we think there's a great deal of promise, at a minimum, to use the process of voluntary industry cooperation, the negotiations that had taken place before, to see if there might be a sensible result achieved between the original equipment manufacturers and the independent repair shops.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, related to the McCarran-Ferguson Act, could you comment on the imbalance in bargaining position, relative to physicians and hospitals and their inability to negotiate contracts with health insurers? And the chairwoman, to her credit, has been very focused on trying to do what we can in this committee to improve affordable, accessible health care to small business folks. And that's one of in traveling around my districts, is one of the things I hear over and over again. One of the greatest challenges of small business folks is providing affordable health care for their employees. So could you discuss physicians and hospitals and their ability or inability to negotiate when it comes to their health care companies?
I know this has been a contentious point. It's one that we continue to look at in great detail, whether we're looking at hospital mergers or collaborations involving physicians. Our sense in many instances is that physician groups and hospitals, in fact, have strong countervailing power when they deal with insurance companies. But my larger plea to put us in a position to be able to address these phenomena more is that I'm not fond at all myself, and I speak for myself, of the McCarran-Ferguson exemption. I think that is very much worth a rethink by this body. And I also think, again, to the extent that you find in our statute a limitation imposed in the early 1980s that curbs our ability to do research and studies concerning the business of insurance without a fairly elaborate process of approvals, I think it would be time to put us in a position to examine and rethink some of the positions I've been suggesting to you. It would be helpful if that were disbanded.
Thank you very much.